Singularity University's massive transformative purpose is to educate, inspire, and empower leaders to leverage exponential technologies to address humanity's biggest challenges. Every single industry will be affected by exponential technologies, and if you're not paying attention to them, you're going to be taken by surprise. But certainly some of the biggest ones and some of the ones that are coming sort of the most quickly. Transport is a huge one. Autonomous vehicles are coming much faster than I think most people expect, and the ripple effects of them will be much more far-ranging than most people expect. We're also going to be seeing massive changes in the financial sector. So accountancy, one of the first roles that they're looking to automate, and we'll see massive changes in legal, in education. There really isn't a sector that doesn't get touched by this, but those are certainly some of the big ones that we're going to see sooner than later. The way that exponential technologies affect society has sort of multiple layers to it. So there's the first order layer, which is what does the technology do to our current jobs? Where do new jobs come from? How do we make sure we're training people for those new jobs? Sort of the sort of immediate response to what's happening in terms of automation. But there are bigger layers to it, right? So one of the next questions is to go, okay, if automation ends up eliminating large chunks of the workforce, then our sort of automatic response is to go, well, we need to find new jobs for them. But a deeper response that we could have is to question the underlying structure itself, right? So we forget that we kind of made up the idea of a 40-hour work week. That's not a law of nature. That's something that we invented. And so one of the questions would be, okay, well, if we can automate 50%, 80% of what humans do right now, do we need to have jobs? Could we set up something different? What would be our meaning or our sense of identity? We also wrap so much of our sense of self-identity around the work that we do. So if the jobs go away, what does that mean for our sense of self-identity? So in terms of what exponential technologies mean for society, the questions start to get deeper and deeper the more you look into it. And it's one of the reasons that I do the work that I do, because I think more people need to be having these kinds of conversations, because these are questions certainly that don't have any simple answers. There are a whole bunch of ethical issues raised from exponential technologies. So one of the biggest ones has to do with the use of artificial intelligence, and specifically the deployment of algorithms that rely on historical data sets in order to inform their process. So an example of this is in the US, there's a system called Compass that is used to inform parole decisions. And when they analyzed the system's recommendations, what they found was that it was highly likely to misidentify a black defendant as being likely to reoffend, and likely to misidentify a white defendant as being unlikely to reoffend. So it was mistakenly saying that the black defendants were more criminal and the white defendants were less criminal, and wrong on both counts. So that's a kind of a terrible story, but the good news is when we're dealing with something like AI or an algorithm, is that if we're aware of that kind of bias that gets built in, then we can correct for it. And it's much easier to correct a computer than it is to correct a human, when we know that we have lots of human bias in our system as well. Studies have been done with judges, for example, that they will issue harsher sentences just before lunch because they're hangry. And how do you correct for that, right? You can't really. So one thing we have to be really mindful of is historic bias being built into algorithms. We also have a lot of ethical considerations in terms of privacy. These are things that we're facing right now. The use of Facebook, Google, YouTube, Instagram, Tinder, all of these apps and platforms that track us pretty much everywhere we go and know more about us than we know about ourselves. We don't really have a good public civic dialogue about that and the implications there. And then we also have massive ethical implications in terms of inequality. So with technological unemployment and increasing inequality, not only inequality across individuals, but inequality across firms, where the biggest, most successful firms pay lots and lots of money for the best talent and therefore get bigger and better and more successful, and kind of continue to increase that divide. Massive ethical considerations there. When we look at how exponential technologies affect healthcare, we start to have ethical considerations about about the use of gene sequencing, patenting of gene sequences or genomic data, access to that kind of support or care. The list kind of goes on, and it's one of the reasons that when people ask me what their kids should study, my first answer is usually philosophy or human behavior or ethics or psychology. But we need people who can think about thinking, who can think about what it means to be human, who can think about what is truly meaningful for us as a species, and what things we should maybe revisit. It's interesting to say building algorithms to have a human touch, because what does a human touch really mean, right? We've got humans that have vastly different value systems or belief sets across an individual building might contain humans with vastly different value systems and belief sets, let alone humans across different countries or around the world. One of the really challenging things is to go, okay, how do we program values into artificial intelligence or into our algorithm when we struggle to even agree on what our values should be? The great thing about exponential technology, and about this kind of conversation in particular, is that what it forces us to do is articulate what our values are. So, for example, I had a conversation recently with someone who was saying, well, when you're driving, everybody kind of knows what the right thing to do is if there's an accident, but we can't program those values. We know what our values are, but we can't program them into the machine. And my response was, we actually don't know what our values are. The challenge we have now is we're going, okay, we have a car. We have to decide in advance in any particular situation whether the car is going to sacrifice the occupant or sacrifice the person that it might hit, right? So we have to think about those things in advance. When we're just dealing with human drivers, we don't have to have those conversations in advance. Whatever happens, happens, and if you're doing your best, you'll kind of be okay. So it's quite exciting now to start to get into those robust conversations, but it means that we collectively as a society have to step up a little more and be willing to engage in conversations that are a little more uncomfortable than the ones we usually have. So I see governments engaging with exponential technologies in a whole series of ways. Governments are, of course, made up of lots of individual people, and so some people are super excited by this conversation. Some people don't really believe that this stuff is happening. Some people are aiming to be a little more protective, so they might believe it's happening, but think, oh, well, actually what we need to do is really protect the old system rather than embrace the new system. I find that by and large, the governments that I talk to tend to be more receptive when we're talking about the sort of sexy technology. So, autonomous vehicles, for example, everybody loves a self-driving car. They love to do a photo shoot with them. They love to, have a go around the track in them. That's kind of a fun thing to engage in. I find that it's less common for governments to be having the conversations about technological unemployment and embracing things like minimum basic income, which is not the answer, but it's one possible regulatory intervention that could be done. I find we're less inclined to have conversations at a governmental level about transformation of the school system for a future that looks nothing like the past. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I think it's really difficult to be a politician. Whether you like your politicians or not, it's a hard job, right? Guaranteed at least half the people hate you all the time. So I think one thing we can do as citizens is if we start to have these conversations and start to form or shape the ideas of the kind of future that we collectively want, and then we can provide our politicians with the political will to be able to act on our behalf, then we will be supporting them to engage in the kind of policy conversations we want them to engage in. If we leave it up to them, they love to get in front of the parade, but if we leave it up to them, it's going to be much more difficult. So I'm bringing the SingularityU Australia Summit to Sydney because when I first attended the executive program at Singularity University, I came away with a profound sense of urgency and responsibility for how massive the impact of these technologies is on every single one of us, how profound the effects are, the fact that these technologies affect everything about our economy, our government, our healthcare system, our education system. Everything about the way that we live, work, and play gets touched by these technologies, and we are collectively totally unprepared for it. That's not a slight on Australia at all. Like worldwide, we're collectively unprepared for this. And so I came away with this real sense of responsibility to do what I can to help more people. Like I don't have any answers, but to at least help more people start to ask more informed questions and engage in those really difficult conversations, because that's really what we need right now. If we don't engage in those kinds of conversations, that what we're going to end up with is the future being kind of done to us instead of us co-creating the future that we want. So that's why we're bringing it to Sydney.
Work Club is not just a workspace. It's about creating experiences for our members that includes retail experience, that includes hospitality experience. If you work in isolation, you're less likely to find answers. Nothing is a coincidence. Everything is there to create an experience that's second to none. Every piece of furniture in Work Club has got its story, and it's made by people who are passionate about what they do.
You come here, it's like got the charm. Every single one of my clients that comes in here is like, oh wow, you know.
It just really works for us. It's given a lot of actually strength to our brand when our clients come here.
You end up in the kitchen, around the cafe space as part of the Florence Guild event series. You end up having conversations with people who work in completely different fields.
The fact that you're staying for an event that's really going to get you to think differently and meet with people that are not just working here but also from other environments makes it a real reason to stay and spend the evening and connect with them and have great conversations.
All we could do was just try to create or curate a diverse group of people and then see what happened, and hopefully the space would create the foundation for that.